such a lovely collaboration of two female artists. How did it come about that you decided to do a documentary on Robyn?
I had just met through a friend the editor of a new magazine called Dumbo Feather. This was about 7 years ago, and Dumbo Feather is now produced in Melbourne. And so I thought, I'd better go and check out what this magazine is. And I went into a newsagent's, and I had no intention to buy the magazine because it was $15. Anyway, so I stood there flicking through it, and then I saw this story about Robyn and these amazing photos. And the photos from the 80s were very, very familiar to me because, that was sort of when I was a teenager, and I loved that whole, new romantic thing. And I bought The Face and all those magazines coming out from the UK. So I loved the photos. But it was also the India element that just grabbed me, in this huge leap that Robyn had made of giving up all that success in London, giving up a material life and going to India and pursuing photography as a spiritual practice, but still producing these equally stunning photos. I'd also spent quite a lot of time in India by that point. And had also, India was sort of the focus of my academic studies. I've got a master's in anthropology, and I'd been making a lot of radio docos over in India and a short film there. So I kind of got that whole element.
You sort of had to do it in a way.
Yeah,
I
had to do it. I totally had to do it. But I couldn't put the magazine down, actually. I had to finish reading it. So then I thought, well, I knew instantly I wanted to make a film, so I had to go and pay for it then, sadly. But I finished the whole article before I went up to the counter and paid for it. And then luckily through the editor, I contacted her pretty much immediately, and it turned out Robyn was luckily in Australia, and we had lunch about 3 days later, and and she rashly agreed to let me make a film about her life. And luckily we were very naive, because I think if we knew it was going to take as many years as it was going to, we never would have started. But I'm glad we were naive.
And how long did it take, actually? Because
it took a bit over 6 years, six and a half, actually.
And how many trips to India? Or you were living there, I think you said.
At one point I was living there for 2 years. I had an academic award to study there. But we went, there were two main shoots there. With Bonnie Elliott was a cinematographer who came on board the project very early, and she was just, very, very, captured by the project and very committed to it. So we had two major shoots, but also while I was living in India, I would go down to Robyn's Town and shoot pickups or whenever there were little things on. And also, when I was back in Australia, there would be things happening that I would shoot, like, photo shoots, exhibitions, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. What I loved about it is a bit hard to... What I did love about the film, and I mentioned to you before, Robyn, is that it was about transformation on so many levels. On the transformation that in those early years in the 80s, the photography and the transformation of makeup and that whole new romantic movement. And then, of course, that relates to the holy ceremonies and the transformation that they are also doing. But what I also love is there is a transformation for you personally and your personal journey. Obviously, you had a spiritual awakening or something touched you when you first went to India. Did you know you were looking for that? I
honestly didn't.
You didn't have a feeling like you needed...
No, that was never on the agenda, I think I was vitalised when I saw an exhibition in London that Rajiv Sethi put on. It was that Aditi exhibition, and there were puppeteers and performers and people doing makeup, and I just thought, why have I not gotten off the plane in Bombay? The next time I won't. I will, I won't go on. So, but I think it was very good that I did about 12 trips over 5 years, because I was a bystander, I was looking in before I made my decision to jump, if you could imagine plunging into a pool diving for the first time. So I understood a lot, and I was very privileged to be placed into that position and to be allowed to take those photographs. And I think that was really the key of it. And so, as soon as I got a big job, I would go back and buy lots of film and a plane ticket and want to be back there. And so I think it was only in 92 when I moved there, and many of the friends I had in Delhi would come over to London and say, do you really think you should be doing this? And people like Adele Rootstein and Zandra and Andrew was saying, do you really think you should be doing this? And so on both sides I was, and so then I just thought I have to do it, something. I've always gone through a lot of green traffic lights, I think, since I landed in London in, even in the late 60s, opportunities presented themselves, and even to learn photography, and you've seen all that in the film. But I think I've always considered myself, well, you know, I will just go down that avenue because, you know, it might take me somewhere, but nothing had been planned. And I certainly was ready. There was an interesting story in London when I first moved there. I met this fabulous photographer called Kirstie Clements, and she was just giving up after photographing for 10 years in the 70s. And I said, Krista, how can you do that? You know, you're at a high level of... And 10 years later, I was doing it myself, you know, but unbeknownst to me. But once the National Gallery collected the work and, you know, it was kind of like I could close that chapter of my life and move on. And the documentary side of it, I mean, if I was working for no money in London, why not work for no money in India? You know,
Were there a lot of with your photographs in the 80s, and I know that you got a lot of advertising work, it says in the film, what were you being published in? Were you in The Face and what have you, or was it more?
No, it was more like Ritz magazine and Ritz newspaper and a lot of magazines that you probably wouldn't know here, Architectural Design and, ID, and they were running alongside The Face. And then the colour supplements picked up. But for a long time I was never published, you know. You being at Vogue would never publish me. And I was known as a weird photographer. But you did run a story on me in the early 90s. I was reminding you of.
You have to find
So
that
it was difficult, but we hardly had any money to buy the film, you know, and we didn't get published because we were too off the walls. So it wasn't really until that Observer picture that it was, you know,
and
acceptable.
That the Beeche opportunity came up.
So I only had about 4 years really of doing that kind of work.
I think there's that beautiful moment in the documentary where you realise, and you wouldn't make the connection, 80s London, you know, Blitz Club, Steve Strange, but you and then it focuses on the boy at the ceremony with the eye makeup, and all of a sudden you can see that absolutely seamless connection between what you were doing in London, not even knowing potentially that you were channeling what was happening in India.
Yeah, it only became apparent after spending many years and getting into those situations. I mean, the Rust Leader is always a fascinating thing because the people on stage are all male, and for ritualistic reasons. But an academic Indologist who visited me a lot in Vrindavan, she once happened upon seeing the work once the book came out, the UK work, and she actually, before she became involved in academia, she was working in fashion in New York, tripping through the snow in stilettos, she told me. And she's about 85, this woman, a really brilliant woman. And she said to me, well, really, Robyn, you've gone from the profane to the sacred. That's what you've done. And I thought, well, actually, you are right, Eleanor, you are right. Not that, you know, the profanity in England worried me whatsoever, but it was a nice way that she actually, you know, could see the what I had been through and what I was into.
The fashion shows, I think, was interesting. I like what you were talking about, that enthusiasm of trying to get into the Jean-Paul Gaultier show. It's when I started as a fashion editor, it was like we would, if not have tickets, and be sneaking. It was so excited to go in, and you being the only woman there, as a catwalk photographer, that hasn't changed very much. There's only about 2 or 3 working now.
Really?
As women, yeah. Would you still feel the same sense of excitement to see a fashion show now, or to go to a fashion show now? Or
Yeah, I would, because there's nothing like, I mean, first of all, the venues are spectacular, but my brother's sitting here today, and he will remember our mother's love of fashion, and she used to go to David Jones and buy a Jean Patou pattern, and she would make the coat for my sister. And she would always talk about the beautiful hems, and the last time I ever saw her, she came over to London, and she spent every day in Harrods looking in the designer room at the hems of the clothes. And, you know, so I think that I got that love of actual cloth and movement. And also, I mean, the guys on the end of the catwalk are 5.6 Wallace, you know, they just snap, and they're not really evoking the emotion of the garment.
It's a very few and Bill Cunningham's. There are not that many.
Yeah. And Bill hated shooting the clothes.
Sorry?
He hated shooting the clothes,
yes.
But a fantastic person. I knew him.
Yeah, you did, yeah. I mean, that was that was I thought, parallels to the documentary. If anybody's seen the Bill Cunningham New York documentary, you are documenting a documenter in a way. Tell me a little bit about that. Is that how it? Tell me about that process.
Yeah, and in some ways that's challenging, and in some ways it's really easy. So Robyn understands documenting in the process and the requirements. The challenge is that she's used to being the documenter and used to being in charge, and I think it's very different.
Does she tell you what to do all the time?
No, but it was actually very useful, especially in the town, that she knew where the best angles for the best shots were, so that was very handy. But it is very different to be put in front of the lens and asked to explain yourself. And it can be very confronting, especially when the film's going out to the world. But I think she was very courageous about that. And as her sister said, and something that ended up on the cutting room floor, but she's a very plucky person. And I mean, she was talking about, the situations Robyn goes into, but I think that could also be said for her of agreeing, to this kind of crazy, mad experiment we've been doing for the last year, the last few years, because you are required to expose yourself, and it is difficult. But I actually thought that film was beautiful, the one about Bill Cunningham, and it gave me a lot of hope because, we didn't get funding for the film until the post-production stage. So, I've been working on it for 5.5 years at that stage, and it was really hard. And, and I'd had commissioning editors saying to me, oh, people aren't interested in spirituality, or, there's no conflict, we're not interested in all this sort of thing. But I just, really had this belief that this film was worth making and Robyn's life story was worth telling. But I went to that Bill Cunningham film when it was being showed in Sydney, and the cinema was packed out. And that just gave me so much faith that, people do have this desire. It's not just me, but other people want to see these stories about people that have led inspiring lives or had this incredible passion for what they do, people that have made great sacrificed comfort, but gained freedom or been able to fulfill their artistic or spiritual visions. So,
yeah.
So.
The other thing, the parallel that I saw was the meticulousness of your archiving, which is such a wonderful thing. I mean, it seems that it's a bit OCD, Rob. You're a little bit OCD. All those drawers, and it's all perfect, and it's...
Well, one has to do that in India because of the elements. The heat is fierce, and the slides fungus and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do it, once, I'll do it really correctly and well. But it's so much easier now digitally to do that. But you see, when I left London, I gave Sandra and Andrew a filing cabinet each of their work and said, here you are, this is your life, I don't know what this fierce documentation thing is with me, but I think I appreciate old photography. I appreciate, 19th century photography. I love, the old Indian photography, which now has become, out there and up there and very expensive. So I suppose I've learnt all of those processes. It's very interesting because I'm still shooting some film and I still have my Hasselblad and my Leica. And when I go to things like the Kumbh, those huge festivals, I enjoy the actual...
You shoot on film.
Yeah, I shoot on film and because it's just a different experience. And I like sharing, when I come... Melbourne has been really kind to me. I mean, you've actually put my career on the map, Melbourne. You gave me a show in 2007. The book came out of Melbourne, and now I'm being screened on this beautiful...
Yes, we're a bit jealous.
I mean, I have to say to Lesley, it's the most wonderful experience to see your work on this, screen and Bonnie's filming. I learnt more tonight about the film itself, which Leslie's done a brilliant job because really... I didn't think she had much material to work on, actually. And I'm sorry about the dirty slides. They should really not be there. And that's my fault.
Don't mention them.
But I say when the work was shown in India, I do workshops everywhere I go. When I was down in Melbourne, I was doing workshops. This Indian photographer came up to me last Holi and he said to me, after your talk in Bombay, when I saw all that work, he said, I gave up commercial photography and I've been wandering India for a year. And will you look at my portraits? And I said, yeah, sure. So they're on both continents, whatever I believe in is working at those levels. And after all, those photographers that haven't had the exposure until recently about, what European photography was about and they had no access to seeing that work. So they are taking it, looking at it, on a very different level. So And the film has been shown in Delhi already.
Is it? I was going to ask, did
yeah.
you do a big premiere
Lesley
in
did a
Delhi? Or
screening, yeah.
Yeah.
pink carpet?
No, not quite. There wasn't a red carpet, but we were very lucky, you know, after I harassed them a lot, I must admit, the Australian Embassy finally agreed to sort of host a screening. Well, actually, I went ahead and organised it and then said, here's the day, you have to get on board, because I was going there for a wedding anyway, and hired the venue and stuff. So they did. They came on board and they branded as part of Ozfest, which is sort of a festival of Australian culture which goes throughout India. I mean, mostly it's focused on touring MasterChef around India. But they very kindly agreed to this one-off screening, and the Deputy High Commissioner did come along, and we kind of thought, oh, is he going to be this stuffy guy? But he wasn't. He was this cool young guy in jeans.
Yeah?
He was dressed for, you know, very film appropriate for the Delhi boho scene. And it got a lot of fantastic press in India, which we were very happy about.
So do you separate, Robyn, your exhibits? Is the 80s there and India is this? They do not. How do you curate that?
Yeah, well, the book bridges it, you know, but it begins in UK and ends up in India. But I've never done a joint, an amalgamation of the two.
Would that make sense to you?
It would, and it would be really great for me to go through the archives. And I've done Indian work against miniature paintings, the way I've revitalised the painting into being a real life. It was in Canberra, actually, Divine Worlds or something it was called, and there was some at the NGV as well. So yes, no, it'd be a great thing to do, and I've often wanted to do it. So,
how big do you think your archive is? How many photos do you?
Oh,
or do you know the exact number?
No, I mean it's thousands, and I've still got so much UK work that's not been seen. There's an exhibition opening next week in Sydney at Black Eye Gallery, which if anyone's in Sydney, come along.
Very excited because there's actually going to be work that nobody has seen at all except for you.
And so that's
How many
really.
pieces are you
It's only 18 works. It's a small gallery, but But then again, it's really nice to. And you see, the work was never shot as art. It was shot just
for fun.
Yeah. And so for it to, it went into the NGA. They've got 55 pictures, but it went in on the fashion, platform rather than the photography platform. So now the boxes have moved into the photography section.
Right.
So that's really interesting.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask you, when we're going back to that question before about transformation and how that you went to India and it made perfect sense to you to move into that. Do you think there's another one in the future in your life? Will it always be India, or is there?
No, I think it will always be India and Australia. I think there's still a lot of beauty in Australia.
And you spend time here now, so
I'm
you're photographing in
half.
Australia as well?
And different kind of photography. And then I learn about my Indian work that I do in the previous 6 months, more about it here, because I have time to revalue it and to put it into books and stuff like that. There's so many facets of India that I've not explored. I did the arts and crafts and that, but just purely from a portraiture point of view, I mean, the times are changing so quickly that it's really important to try and get as much of it in the can as we can, one might say, really. And of course nothing can stand still, and I appreciate that, and I support and like and help a lot of Indian photographers as well for their work to be seen out here and for them to be exposed to the Western market. So it's a nice symbiosis, and as long as I can do that, I will.
What would a typical day in India, really back down to basics, what would a typical day be for you? Do you photograph every day or?
Mostly every day. Certainly in a lot of seasons I'm photographing all day, every day. But for instance, I do exercise and maybe some meditation in the morning and some yoga if it's appropriate weather. But the most important thing about a day in the life of me in India is the fact that I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't expect what may happen will happen until it happens. And so I don't, like in London, I remember thinking, I'd love the phone to ring and for it to be a job, or, I've got to pay the rent and all that. And so there's none of that, so it's really nice because it's a cultural ashram, and so there are many academics coming in, there are many different aspects of helping and run the ashram that are really invigorating and fabulous to share with people. We have a library of over 12,000 books and fantastic, it's a heritage property. So, but it's the light and the colour, I think, that still take me. I go down to the shops and I'll take my camera. India has no doors. There'll be a body walking by, but it will be colourful. So it's like that I'm still energised, and I think when I'm not energised, it's time that I don't leave Shoal Bay.
I do also like the idea of I admire it greatly that in the world now everyone has an iPhone. We're chronicling everything at every time, and I mean India is a visual feast for anybody to but I like the way that you have to become part of it. You felt it was very important for you to actually organically be, not just observe in a one-dimensional sense, but be part of that society.
Yes, of course, because my radar is open to zeroing in on what really is the purpose of everything. I think that's why the Kumbh Mela is falling apart seriously, because so many photographers are spoiling it for everybody else because they don't have the respect and they do something that bans us all from certain areas. And so I find that really difficult. And Holi's becoming the same. And I'll talk to a lot of these guys and say, well, do you know what Holi really means? And they say, no, it's just people chucking colour and, having a rabble. It's like a rave. And, so it's sad. And I think that, a huge statistic in India is that 50% of the population are under 25. And now when you go into that scene, when Lesley and Bonnie were filming Farlan, the fire scene, I was getting so hassled on top of that roof.
I know, I was worried for
I
you.
tell you, I really
there.
thought over all these years, and I'd been photographing Holi, for 20 years, I thought I was going to go over because of them. They were severely intoxicated and they were really, So I was speaking to them in Hindi and saying, how can you tolerate the heat when the fire goes up? We're Indian, But it was really a bit of a realisation that actually I was putting myself in quite high-risk area and danger. And so I won't go on that roof again.
I was worried for you. Both times I saw the movie, I was like, you're back.
Yeah.
Because it's not very policed.
But, Holi is like that. It's very dangerous, and I've taken many, lots of National Geographic photographers and held many people's hand in trying to get work and, their photographs for them, help them get them. But it's changing. You'll agree with that, won't you, Lesley?
Absolutely.
It's more rabble and the elders don't have control, and the elders are dying off. And when I was shooting for the elders. I was going back, taking them their pictures, showing the film and sharing it,
Yes,
So
which is
keep it
respectful.
going,
Of course.
because if you don't, and now in the temple, when I'm in a scene where I'm photographing, I just produced a book of 20 years of photographing these exquisitely beautiful things inside a temple. But now I've got to accommodate about 25 arms up with telephones and iPads and cameras that are not only taking pictures, but they're videoing.
Yeah.
So they're there for a long time. And the
Really
curtains
spoiling
are
your
only
picture.
open. Well, no, I incorporate it into the pictures. I have
it's
to.
true. It's
Because the darshan, the view is only for maybe 2 minutes, so I got to.
Yeah. And that's you're documenting. That's reality. So that's it. Lesley, tell me on this 6 years is a long time, and it must be a lovely friendship that you formed over that as well. Did you, through making this documentary, did you discover anything about yourself? Was there a surprise that revealed something to you through that film that you were not expecting?
Yeah, other than tenacity. Look, I think for me it was, especially being in those rituals of Holi, because, you can see them on film, but it's completely different being there. And I had experienced Holi before in Delhi, but, it's much more tame. You just sort of play it in your local streets, and it's not nearly as much of this kind of ritual energy. I mean, there's such power and energy when you're in this temple square with, a couple of thousand people. And I think I really felt that when one year I did a recce, and actually, so I wasn't bogged down with all the logistics of really having to film. It was a little bit more just about experiencing it and understanding the spaces. and it was about this enormous opportunity for personal transformation and transcendence. So in the Bhakti tradition, which Bhakti means devotion in Hinduism, and that's the branch or the strand of Hinduism that Robyn follows, there's this sense in these rituals that you can utterly transcend yourself, and you sort of get saturated in what they call ras, which is like this blissful nectar where you sort of become one with the divine. You're in the presence of the divine, you become one with the divine, and it really is very ecstatic. And so I think I really got a huge sense of that, and that was very useful for me too when we came to shoot the following year. And then also in the editing, it was very much something I tried to capture, not just for the people there but also for Robyn, the transcendence that she experiences each time that she does it, and also in a larger sense in her life, this transcendence and transformation she's gone through by dedicating herself to this life in India. And yeah, I would say that was the main thing. And particularly in the editing, I kept trying to bring myself back to that and how I felt in that environment, and trying to reinforce Robyn's point of view through the way that we edited together her photos with the footage that Bonnie had shot.
I think you very much achieved that. I think I mentioned the scene where they're all in those petals, emerging out of those petals, those two men. And it is just so intoxicating. And Robyn is clearly intoxicated as well. And you feel it, even though we're not. Just through film, I felt like I was in that room, so that was a great achievement. I'd like to open up questions to the audience as well, because I'm sure everybody's got some angle on this documentary, and was it so multifaceted? Does anybody want to ask anything?
I'd like to say congratulations. I think the film is beautiful, and I just wanted to know something about the music, which was fantastic.
Actually, the composers are from Melbourne. Hooray!
Yay, Melbourne Day today, aren't we?
It was really funny because I was shopping around for composer. I mean, I tried to license, a couple of 80s tracks, and they were just such ridiculous sums of money, really. Right. And I did license one, that beautiful track you hear at the end, and you also hear it in the middle. And that was something I've been listening to for 20 years. It's a beautiful track by a composer called Makyo, and it's remixed by Bill Laswell, who's this sort of slightly esoteric musician who's done all sorts of things, and I've been following him for years. So I did manage to license that from a very, very kind Makyo who lives in Japan, and who took pity on me when I approached him with this appalling offer, really, of a few dollars. But I was shopping around for composers in Sydney, and as soon as they'd hear India and spirituality, they'd send me this music. It was honestly like this new age float tank music, which kind of made me want to spew. It was just so kind of sickening and overworked. And so finally, through my cinematographer's partner, he said, why don't you contact this woman called Nicole Skeltis in Melbourne? And I did. And Nicole, I spoke to her on the phone, and she just ran down to her friend Byron Scullen, who's a sound engineer and also a composer, and they cooked up this track that afternoon, and they sent it through to me by the evening, and I knew that they had got it. So they did all the music. I've actually still never met them in person. Nicole's since moved to London, but we still communicate. And Byron, I did invite him, but I don't think he's here tonight. No. I've never met them, but we had a lot of Skypes and that sort of thing. And you can just push everything backwards and forwards over the internet these days. So that's how we did it. But I was very happy with and they managed to capture the tone.
What are your hopes for the film? I mean, it's been screened as a smaller version, right, on ABC? Correct?
Yeah. It did pick up a sales agent in Holland, so we're trying to get some international sales. We've only sold it to Holland so far. It is a hard film to sell because it's a very niche film, and because it combines these different things of sort of, fashion and photography, but also spirituality in India. And, most broadcasters are very slot-driven, and if you don't fit into their genres, they don't know what to do with you. So it's been a little slow, but it's just starting to pick up now. It's just been accepted into the world's premier film festival of art films, and that's in Montreal in a couple of months, and it's just going to be in the Byron Bay Film Festival, and it's had this beautiful screening. And my hope is that it really takes off and it finds its audience. I think even though that audience might be niche, there's a lot of people still interested in this sort of thing, and they're scattered all around the world. So we're going to do a little bit more online marketing into that.
To me, it's not a niche film. I think it's very female as well. I think that it's a journey and an exploration.
Yeah.
And how did you feel being put, as Lesley was saying, you were behind the camera normally documenting, and you were like the quiet one at the Blitz Club. How did you feel being the subject? Was that...
I think the best way to describe it is terrified. And I sort of watched it,
like that, yeah.
When it was first, when we were watching it on Artscape. It was more that it's very difficult to have your life exposed, actually. Very, very difficult. And I remember after some of the interviews I did with Lesley in India, saying to her, when you're actually editing the film together, can I get to say what I would not like use? And she said no. And so
I don't remember that. I thought I said, well, we'll talk about it. But anyway.
And so then I thought, well, actually, that's... but I had great faith in Lesley and have always had faith in Lesley. Otherwise, I couldn't have gone through it. And we've been through, some times when it was really, really tough to have enough money to do anything. And Lesley's, it's a real tribute to her that you've produced it. But now I think it's good for the younger generation. What do you think, Jack? My nephew is here. I think his children might appreciate it. Yeah. On a family point of view, I think it's really been very, very nice to share it with my family, because they didn't really understand what I did in India. And so, and one of my nephews is a really hot editor, and he said after he watched the Artscape showing, he said, wow, that was great, brilliant. So, but it's more of an embarrassment, but now I'm getting used to that embarrassment that I'm out there. And
you should enjoy it.
Well, I am enjoying it, and I really did enjoy today. It was fantastic. It's the first time I've really seen it without that kind of veil of nervousness. So thanks, Lesley, for today.
Does anybody else have any questions that they wanted to ask?
Establish an audience for. Oh, okay. Okay. And I was interested to know if you found that, when you're watching the film from your early days, and then you see the difference between what was happening for you in London and then what was happening for you in India, and did it seem just totally like two different worlds? And if that was the case, over time, has that mellowed for you? Because then later to see you back in London at the galleries, and to be doing, and in Melbourne at the galleries and at your showings, and it's sort of, I wonder if that makes your head spin sometimes.
No, because I think I've got such wonderful friends in Rajiv and Andrew who also spend a lot of time in India, Sandra, that we're used to that kind of going backwards and forwards. But it was more very difficult for me to share my personal life in India rather than the photographic journey as such. It had to go deeper, and it had to have, that kind of, some of the editing was a surprise to me even when I saw it for the first time. But I can see that it hasn't bugged some people, or it's pleasing to other people. But I think any revelation about anybody, if they're writing about a book about themselves, or once you put yourself out there, there's still, of course, a whole world of me that nobody will know and will never know.
That's more. Documentary number 2.
Because how can you put it in 1 hour? No, there's so many different experiences and things like that. And the fashion scene in London also was very different maybe to how it has been portrayed, because all of those people, everybody had problems. They had, highs and lows, and the because we were working so closely together. And I, of course, was surprised by what people did say about me, because I didn't know that until at the end. And so the whole thing has been a real surprise, actually, but a good surprise. And I do think that, you know, I'm getting much more used to it. And the director of the ashram who's on the film, Shivatsa Goswami, Lesley sent him a DVD, and he said, I'm really, really thrilled to have this come out, because it also is putting a very good light on the ashram's work, which I've been so involved in. And, you know, he was so bowled over by the way that Lesley put it together and by the way Bonnie filmed it. And nobody else had ever done that in all of the years, 20 years. And, of course, we've got so much footage that we've not ever put into a film, but because there was no real story to tell like that. But I just think, I don't know, does it kind of answer your question that really it's hard to put yourself on the stage? Very hard.
Yes.
I was so moved by that documentary, so thank you so much. And the thing that I found really moving was something that Kirstie pointed out about mapping the similarities between the scene at the Blitz and the decoration and the sort of performance of the self and the playfulness, and then the religious rituals. And you mentioned moving from the profane to the sacred, but what it brought out for me, which was I'm just so touched by, is actually the sacredness of that 80s time and the nightclub time, and because it's all about life force and desire and experimentation.
Yeah.
And so I found the way that you produced that in the documentary really incredibly touching, and particularly in what it says about queer culture as well. So I just wanted to thank you for that. I think it's a really complicated piece, and I was I'm going to cry. I was really touched. So thank you.
Thank you.
And also,
I love
so
making
many
people cry.
so many of those people are no more. And you must remember too, in the 80s, every day we went to a funeral. You know, so it was a real tough time. Bill Gibb and, you know, Divine.
I think it was interesting to see those photos, and it's nice that your life has been chronicled as well in all those beautiful photos and videos of your real spunk in that bikini. But that time and those people like Divine, Lee Bowery, I think there was a Carmel, one of those punk girls. They were quite scary.
Scarlett.
Scarlett. You seem so sweet and as the Australian in the middle with the big grin. But I remember going to London in the early 80s and that scene and everything, and they're quite frightening. Like Lee Bowery was, I know obviously he was a doll as a person, apparently, but he...
but you see, that's all persona. I mean, and Divine's the perfect example of that, you know. That underneath it all, gentlest, softest, funniest person that you could ever meet. So... You know, and he'd be going up on stage before he went to perform saying, I hope I don't die on this stage tonight, you know, in these heels, because that's not how I want to go. But you see, that's what I think Lesley's been also very clever at introducing. I mean, all of those people, maybe it's the same when a lot of people come to Vrindavan and say, and I take them to the temple. They're too afraid to go to a temple themselves. Whereas when I take them, they say, wow, why haven't I been going into temples everywhere? So again, it's all in the imagination in a way.
I think you're quite fearless, because I think both India, they're difficult. Their worlds, they're not cosy, fuzzy worlds to enter into, you know, and I think...
Yeah, maybe because, you know, I'm 1/16th Maori, I'm very at home in India. You know, maybe it's those roots coming out that I don't feel afraid in those.
Yeah.
I'm charged by them, rather.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Hi.
Congratulations on a wonderful body of passion. And
Thank you.
I did want to ask you, the transition from film to digital and Photoshop nowadays, what are your thoughts on that and the transition?
I think it's very interesting that many young people are going back to film, and I kind of thought, you know, that this would happen. I think that people, from what I see on the internet, people are appreciating film for its qualities and for the experience of actually shooting, when shooting, what you gain from learning about doing that. I think there is nothing like a fantastic transparency, and there never will be for reproduction. But it's expensive, and with all the companies going under, very difficult to keep up with the film. I had to go to digital at the ashram because I couldn't keep, it was far too expensive to keep doing the film, but we've got an enormous film archive there. But I would always say that film wins.
I would imagine in the 80s it would have been a lot of fun, though, with all the creativity, without all the digital there back then.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just think that, I've had a couple of experiences with being shot on a digital Hasselblad and an operator sitting there, and it's a whole different experience, whereas I tell you, it was nail-biting to wait for the first clip test to come back on one of those shots because you knew you had it in the camera. Yeah. Can you imagine? I came back with 41 rolls of film from Paris, and I gave it to the lab, and my film was the last to be loaded onto the reels, and all of the other photographers' film was also out there to be loaded. And the girl loading the reels dropped the last roll, and she switched the light on to pick it up. And so
that was Paris. There goes Paris.
So that was Paris gone that year. But there's all those things I know when I was working for Grant. I mean, he had the most superb stainless steel reels that loaded from the inside. They weren't like the Patterson ones that you coax the film into the middle. They were from the middle out. And I'd ring up Gay or Jeff and say, I'm terrified. I'm sure the film's stuck together, and it's such an expensive shoot. You see, we had all that as overheads over our head. And so I think until I left and picked up my first digital photographer, there was always that strain. And, I was using Kodachrome processing in Delhi, and that was still also very interesting. And so there was that edge to it, definitely. Yeah. I think it's also a great pity these days. I mean, I do love phone photography, and I think the iPhone's brilliant and everything, but and the filming on it and everything, and it is, I mean, India's crazy for phones. Everybody has one. Yeah. But I do think that it's a different kind of photography, and I think that when people have the opportunity to explore and go back in time and learn about real photography, that it's really very nice to just have,
it seems more organic, doesn't it?
It is, definitely. Yeah. And, it's a different kind of relationship between the subject as well. I don't think many people when I'm shooting films say, show me it. And I said, I can't, sorry, I can't. But I used to leave hundreds of Polaroids all over India. I still go back and see them up on the top of the Himalayas and that, because Polaroid used to endorse me, and I used to give the pictures out freely. But maybe it'll go back, maybe it won't. But it's very interesting that, when I share my work with students, I say try and collaborate and get off Photoshop and have the real experience. And I think that even in the making of all of those, that work in the 80s, I could not have done it on my own, for sure. It was the brilliance of, the makeup artists and the hair. I used to say, and so therefore one becomes a director, and I think a lot of, directing the time and how the time's spent in the studio, and leave your egos outside the door, come in and have fun. It's all that kind of stuff. But a lot of the really great photographers in London at the time, Bailey and all those people, have gone into directing big-time commercials and film, pop videos and stuff. So that was the next progression. I do it in my own funny way.
You do?
In India, but I was just lucky last year at the Kumbh Mela to get, a fantastic lineup of the Naga Babas and Sadhus coming at me, and I want to make it into a Ben-Hur sort of moment, but I haven't had time yet. But I do appreciate film, and I really, shared that love for a very long time with my brother, who was mad about Louis Buñuel, and I met Buñuel's grandson this time at the Kumbh Mela, and I just said to him, tell me, what it was like growing up with a grandfather like that. And he said, well, he taught me all about insects. He said I was 10 before he, when he died, but he taught me all about insects.
Oh, gorgeous.
And so there's all that, I'm just thrilled that you've come today. Thank you very much. And if, whatever bit of the film grabbed you is very nice for me to share with you. I can see Janet here, who I just left in India a few months ago. And did you enjoy it, Janet? Oh, good.
Well, and I know that when I was asked to come do that, I mean, what a thrill to be able to come down here to Melbourne and see that film and to meet these two incredibly inspiring women. So thank you, James, for inviting me, and Lesley and Robyn, all the best, and let's make it hugely successful globally.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kirstie.